When the trigger was pulled, a wheel would spin to create sparks, igniting gunpowder inside and sending a bullet flying out of the barrel and toward the enemy. And if the shooter missed and the other soldier charged, he could just swing the axe at short range, fighting off the enemy soldier. But since the axe head was big and heavy, it was hard to aim the gun, and the gun's body made it hard to hold the axe, meaning it would have been more useful as two separate weapons. The toddler wandered away from his home, and search teams combed the desert for him. Nearly 7 miles away, the boy walked until dark and curled up under a tree, all alone. But a ranch dog was patrolling for coyotes nearby when he found the boy, and instead of returning home, the dog stayed beside him all night, guarding him from coyotes until morning. Then the dog led the boy to the ranch, and the boy was finally reunited with his family. She handed him a 1-pound weight, and he laughed. He had lifted much heavier weights before, so he grabbed it and held it out in front of him with ease. But then the teacher told him to keep holding it. A few minutes passed, and his arm started to tighten. After half an hour, it began to ache. Then the pain grew sharp. By the end of the period, his arm was shaking. He could barely keep it up. Now, the weight never changed. It was still just 1 pound, but the longer he carried it, the heavier it felt. And that's when the teacher explained. Thinking about a problem for a moment is manageable, but if you carry that stress all day, it'll drain you. Carry it for years, and it can break you. Not because the problem got bigger, but because you got weaker from never setting it down. They made the caterpillars smell the chemical. Then tiny electric shocks shot through its body, which taught it to avoid that smell. And when the caterpillar was ready to transform, it dug into the earth and shed its skin one final time. Next, its own cells began breaking it down from the inside. Its muscles and organs were recycled, turning its tissues into a nutrient fluid. And when the transformation was finally complete, they tested it again with that same smell, and immediately it turned away, meaning the moth still remembered its life as a caterpillar. When someone dies in the house, the beekeeper will gently knock on the hive, according to tradition. Then they'll whisper the dead person's name inside. Some even place a black cloth over the hive, while others turn it towards the funeral procession. Now, at weddings, the couple introduces themselves to the bees before a bright cloth is tied to the hive, and a piece of cake is left behind. Now, beekeepers have done this for centuries, because if they don't keep the bees up to date, well, they just might stop making honey. The blind man climbs the tree while listening to directions from his armless friend below. He cuts out small shoots to replant before the armless man tucks a shovel between his cheek and shoulder, using his feet to push it into the soil and dig holes. The blind man places the shoot inside the holes, and his friend gathers water from the river with a bucket and his feet. For 13 years, they've been doing it this way every day, in the hopes of restoring their village. And even though their work has been destroyed by drought and then floods, they still haven't stopped planting. They built a giant metal frame and covered it with a thick rubber skin before sticking in hoses filled with pressurized air to make it move around. And after connecting it to a crane, the shark could swim underwater and even pop out from the waves. But they only tested it in fresh water, so when the shark was put into the sea, the salt water rusted over the electrical parts. It stopped moving and then sank. So instead, the director shot several scenes from the shark's point of view, which meant he barely had to show it at all, and what you imagined in the water ended up being far scarier than any rubber prop could ever be. The floorboard snapped under his feet at the abandoned building, and he fell straight down a sewer pipe. And when he hit the water, the current swept him away for nearly a mile, leaving him trapped in total darkness. Over 100 rescuers searched the pipes with floating cameras, and 12 hours later, they spotted muddy handprints along the walls. They rushed to an opening nearby where they heard him cry for help. And after tossing down a rope for him to grab, they finally pulled him out, covered in sewage, but alive. Press the wood against a curved wall, then slip a marker through a roll of tape and slide it along the wall. Now slide the roll of tape along the surface, letting the round edge follow every curve. And because the tape roll keeps the marker the same distance away, it draws the wall's exact curvature on the boards. Now just follow the outside of the line as you cut, then sand it down and enjoy the perfect fit. You should look for a river if you get lost in the woods and watch which way it flows, then follow it. You see, humans have always needed water for drinking and farming, so they would typically build towns along rivers, meaning following one might lead you back to civilization. But some rivers run through empty forests for miles, meaning you could be walking for a while. While he was studying, a hand reached through the window and dropped a velvet case onto his desk. Inside were 2 glowing contact lenses. He slid one onto each eye, and immediately the text on the page moved. Diagrams animated, labels slid in place, and the answers appeared right on the paper. Every problem was solved before he even finished reading it. On the way out of the library, he saw the man who gave him the lenses watching in the distance. During labs, the lines he needed to cut appeared as paths, and when taking a test, every question lit up with answers only he could see. He graduated at the top of his class and saw the mysterious man again in the crowd. Years passed by, and he became a legend in the industry. While operating, overlays hovered over organs, showing him exactly what to do. And every single one of his patients survived. After years of this, the call came. The president had suffered a stroke live on air. Emergency surgery was needed, and he was their best bet. His hands were shaking as he scrubbed in, but as he stood over the president, the lenses immediately brightened, drawing neat paths across the failing heart. He began to push the scalpel into the skin, but then everything disappeared. There was nothing to guide his hands. Shaking, he pushed the scalpel anyway and cut too deep. Blood spurted up over his arms, and it was too late. Monitors were flatlining. The president was dead. The crowd was horrified as they looked down at the body, except for one man. He was completely unfazed, with a faint smile on his face as he turned and walked away. When you drop the puck, air rushes up from thousands of tiny holes, lifting it and letting it fly across the surface. You see, the table was loosely based on ice hockey, but while pucks glide on ice, they barely move on other surfaces. To solve this, a powerful fan is hidden underneath the table, pumping air in to create a thin cushion underneath the pucks, letting the puck sail smoothly across the surface, just like ice. They built a giant metal wheel and stuck an entire room inside before bolting all of the furniture down. Next, they strapped the camera onto the room while the dancer climbed inside the room. Motors then spun the wheel, making the room and camera rotate while gravity held the dancer in place. And by timing his movements perfectly, he could jump from the floor to the walls before finally dancing on the ceiling. If you clip their nail too far, the blade slices into a bundle of blood vessels and a nerve inside, causing it to gush out blood and send a sharp jolt of pain. But it's hard to see from the outside of the nail, so to avoid hitting it, start by trimming just the very tip of the nail. Then slowly shorten it into small slivers, stopping when you see a tiny dot. He dropped his hammer while working in the field, so his friend grabbed a metal detector and they started looking. The device suddenly started beeping and they thought they had found the hammer, so they dug into the ground, but ended up uncovering silver spoons, then gold jewelry and ancient coins. He called the police, and the next day, archaeologists rushed in, finding over 14,000 Roman coins, along with pounds of jewelry and tableware that had been buried in the field for about 1,600 years. The two ended up sharing the loot that was worth millions. Take about $800 and stash it out of the other player's sight. And during the game, when it looks like you're about to run out of money and lose, you pull out the hidden cash. Do this a few times throughout the game, and you'll condition the other players to always assume you have a stash somewhere. Then, when no one's paying attention, you grab a mix of large bills from the bank, aiming to steal around $3,200. That's enough for 3 to 4 new stashes that you can work with. Now, when you're actually about to lose, you pull out the stolen cash, and no one will question where it came from. He adopted the baboon as a pet and brought it along with him when he joined the army. He gave him a uniform and made him an official mascot. The monkey marched with the troops and lived in the trenches, and even helped keep guard, tugging at the soldier's clothes if he heard an enemy approaching. When his owner was shot in the shoulder, the baboon tried to save him by licking the wound. Not long after, they were struck with a shell, which blew off most of the animal's leg. But both of them survived, and they were sent home as heroes. If someone tripped and fell off of the building, and you threw out a sticky hand to try and save him, it obviously wouldn't do anything. But if you made the entire arm over 60 feet long, with a palm big enough to wrap around his chest, and around 20 people holding the end, and you had it painted with a special glue that could hold over 2,000 pounds, after the hand slapped onto his body, it would dry in just a few seconds, before stretching another 30 feet to break his fall safely. But if the hand touches his bare skin, it might just tear a chunk off instead. Place a domino on the ground, then make the next one 30% bigger. And if you keep increasing their size, the 20th domino would be taller than a house, and the 45th would be higher than Mount Everest. Now, when you tip over the first one, each domino has just enough energy to knock over the next. But the 74th domino would weigh more than the Earth. And at that scale, the domino would have such strong gravity that they would start pulling the Earth and each other toward a shared center of mass.
Fried chicken.
No naman. Girl, sa Chowking, may mas pinasarap na.
Chicken on the dog! Chicken on the dog!
Crunchy, juicy.
Chicken nom 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 nom!
Tikman na. Sarap na, Chow.
He built a wooden frame in the shape of a Lamborghini, then used a turning wheel to shape pieces of aluminum to the body. Next, he welded the chassis, and over the course of 17 years, he put all the pieces together, adding an engine, seats, wheels, and lights. But since he had used his basement as a workshop, he couldn't get the car out. So he got a backhoe to dig a hole down to his basement. Then he created a ramp before knocking down the wall and pulling his dream car out on a sled. If you were shrunk down and dropped in as Pac-Man, you would have to sprint through the maze at about 12 miles per hour to escape the ghosts. But every time you eat a dot, you would slow down for a split second, letting the ghost creep closer behind you. You would also have to reduce your speed to make turns, while ghosts can turn almost instantly. And as you move through higher boards, you would have to increase your speed to 15 miles per hour, meaning one slow turn and one dot at the wrong time, the gap disappears and the ghosts will catch you. He pulled the bearings out of a skateboard and wrapped an old tube around them, then added a motor and put it in the fish tank. Next, he injected a shrimp with bacteria and let it run on the tiny treadmill before measuring the bacteria again. This showed how much bacteria stayed inside the shrimp and how many germs people might eat when it was served. But when people saw the experiment, they were outraged, saying millions had been spent on shrimp fitness, even though the scientist paid for it himself, and it only cost $50. If you get buried by an avalanche, the snow will compress you on all sides, making it hard to tell which way is up. So if you try to dig your way out, you could end up going the wrong way and suffocate to death. Instead, some people say to cover your face and make an air pocket. Then start drooling. Whichever way the drool falls is down, so you should dig the opposite way. He used her fingerprints to open her phone and peeled back her eyelids using her face to unlock her bank account. You see, he was deep in debt from gambling, and when his ex-girlfriend got sick, he mixed cold medicine into her food, making her fall into a deep sleep. He sent himself over $20,000, which he used to pay off his debt, before running away to gamble even more. But when she woke up, she had several alerts from her bank, so she called the police and the man was eventually arrested. If you pick a 3-digit number like 861, where the first and last numbers have at least a difference of 2, and then flip it backwards and subtract the smaller number from the bigger one, flip that answer, and add these two numbers together, you'll get 1089 every time you use this pattern. You see, if you break the number apart, the middle digits match and cancel out when you subtract. This leaves you with the first number minus the last multiplied by 99. But if you look at the multiples of 99 between 2 and 9, they all have a matching pair that's flipped, giving you the same answer of 1089 every time. They drilled a hole into a plastic tube after breaking into the grocery store. You see, that tube was used to move cash into a locked vault. So they pushed a vacuum cleaner through the opening and sucked the money out. For years, the men robbed 15 stores this way, stealing over $800,000 in cash. They were finally caught on camera, but were never identified. He checked into the hotel, but he didn't have any luggage. And once he was inside, he kept all the lights turned off. As the days passed, loud voices could be heard from his door. And soon enough, he was found tied up and stabbed inside his room. He was rushed to the hospital where he passed away. Later, an anonymous caller paid for his funeral, where they sent exactly 13 roses. Police later discovered he had been using a fake name, but with no clear suspect, his murder is still unsolved to this day. The plastic cups are placed next to each eye, covering its side view, while a fuzzy tube is bent over its nose to block out the shadows on the ground. You see, horses can normally see almost everything around them, meaning small movements can easily distract them. By leaving only a tiny space for its vision, the horse can only see the path in front, and the distractions fade away as the horse crosses the finish line. Because when the distractions disappear in our life, the path forward usually becomes obvious. The pilot would pull the ejection handle, igniting a small rocket under his seat. This would cause his body to be slammed with over 1,000 pounds of force, all in less than a second. And this would squish his spine downwards, packing it so tightly that in some cases, his spine wouldn't be able to stretch back, which could leave him a little shorter than he was before. He started painting walls as a teen, and his art spread across the city. People recognized it everywhere, making him a legend. But he got sick with a disease that paralyzed his body, and for 7 years, he could only move his eyes. So a team of programmers built him a pair of glasses with a camera. It tracked his eyes and moved a cursor on the screen. He would stare at a color to select it before moving the cursor to draw lines as the device turned them into brushstrokes. The team projected the art onto buildings across the world, and from his hospital bed, he could paint again. Under this carnival ride, you would bolt a 70-foot frying pan and leave a hole in the center so the spinning arm can still turn. Then crack about 2 million eggs into the pan, and when the ride starts, the arms whip the pan in circles. This perfectly mixes the yolks and the whites like a whisk and soaks the riders inside. Then hire dozens of men with blowtorches to scorch the bottom of the pan. As the eggs cook, the spinning ride would keep folding them over. The riders might sustain some burns and other injuries, but you'll have hundreds of pounds of scrambled eggs to share. He was pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt, and officers gave him a test to see if he had been drinking, but they had to run the test again. The man refused and walked toward the back of his van, saying that he was going to kill them. He yanked open the van doors, releasing his full hive of honeybees that he kept in the back. The swarm exploded into the air, stinging officers as they sprinted for cover. Backup finally arrived and arrested the man, but he paid bail and was released just hours later. If you play a game of chess, every move you make creates a unique path from start to finish. Now, your friend plays a separate game, and even if it looks similar, one different move makes it a completely different game. And if everyone on Earth started playing billions of full games, each one has its own exact sequence of moves. Then, if they all play again and again for their entire lives, you would get trillions of games, and almost none of them would repeat. This is because every move opens new choices, and those choices branch into even more, until the total number of possible games becomes so massive that even if every atom in the observable universe played one unique game per second since the Big Bang, they still wouldn't come close to playing them all. They pried the mirror off of the shower wall because they kept hearing a strange ringing sound, and they were shocked to find a hidden camera inside. They followed the cable through the house until they discovered a hard drive hidden in a closet, and suddenly realized their landlord had been watching them. But when police checked the drive, they found no files. Now, this could mean it was streaming in real time, leaving no trace. But since there were no recordings, no one was charged, and the house mysteriously burnt down 2 weeks later, almost killing their teenage son. When the father went back to look through the rubble, he cut his leg, and it got so infected that he had to have it amputated, meaning the family lost a leg, their home, and their privacy, while the landlord got away scot-free. They glued the dead snail to a museum card before putting it on display, and it stayed in the same spot for years before they noticed that the card had become discolored. And when they removed it, they found a film over the shell's opening. So they placed it in warm water, and slowly the film softened, and the snail pushed its head out, still alive. It had survived by shutting its body down for 4 years until conditions were safe again. Wrap the cable around Mount Fuji's base before the massive motors pull it tight, which will separate billions of tons of rock from the bedrock below. Then drill thousands of deep shafts, driving giant steel anchors deep into the rock, and pump grout to lock them into the mountain's core before wrapping the outside with steel mesh and massive bands. Then use a ring of rockets and cables to lift the entire thing and turn it in the air by adjusting the cable lengths. Once it's flipped, carve a giant hole in the bottom and attach a frictionless bearing inside before threading a cord into the hole and locking it into the shaft. Then connect the cord to thousands of fighter jets that will pull it to make the mountain spin. They kidnapped the musician, according to the story. And when they arrived, he realized he was at the headquarters of a mafia boss who happened to love his music. So he was forced to play piano for the mobster's birthday. But according to him, he was showered with money and poured glass after glass of expensive champagne. After 3 days of performing, he was let go with his pockets stuffed full of cash and a great story. He would slide the arrow into the tube, then hide it in his sleeve. Inside the tube sat a compressed spring, held back by a small trigger. And when he flicked his wrist and pressed the trigger, the spring snapped forward, and the arrow shot straight out of his sleeve. Now, some versions had 2 barrels to fire twice in a row, and others even had multiple tubes to launch several at once, allowing you to shoot from close range while the weapon stays hidden. If you plucked one single hair off Robert's head, he would look exactly the same. Now imagine you pluck another, and another, and soon you've taken dozens, maybe even 100. But Robert still looks normal. Now his hair might be slightly thinner, but no one would say he's bald. So you keep going. Hundreds turn into thousands. Now Robert's scalp is starting to peek through. People might say he's thinning, but he still wouldn't quite be bald. So what if you keep plucking until only 1,000 hairs remain? Well, at some point he starts to be bald. But where exactly is that point? Some people say it's 0 hairs, which is indeed bald, but if you add 1 single hair, he's still bald. Even 10 hairs wouldn't make a difference. So where is the line? At what exact number of hairs does Robert stop being bald? When you spray a German cockroach with poison, a special enzyme inside its body breaks down the chemicals before they can damage the roach's nerves, meaning the poison doesn't work. And if that roach lays eggs, many of their babies will inherit the same protection. Within months, those babies will have more babies, and eventually, most of the colony is safe from the poison. Now, a whole new group can survive the same poison and even stronger chemicals until you're left with roaches that nothing can kill except a stomp. Thin holes are drilled into the gold bar before tungsten rods are pushed inside. And after the surface is patched back up, it looks and weighs just like any other gold bar. You see, tungsten weighs almost the exact same as gold, so counterfeiters use these to trick customers. But if the bar is passed through an ultrasound check, the waves hit the tungsten differently, revealing the scam. If you stick a metal rod into the ground and run electricity through it, the current would move through the wet soil before zapping a worm. And this forces them to escape by wriggling to the surface. Now, if you had 500 trillion of these devices, you could cover the surface of the Earth. And with 130 million nuclear power plants, you could send enough electricity into the ground to pull up every single earthworm, covering the world in a layer of wriggling pink worms. Drop down onto your hands and feet before leaning forward and running like an animal. Since you have 4 points hitting the ground instead of just 2, there are more chances to push off and build speed. Because running fast isn't just about moving your legs quickly, it's about how hard you push while touching the ground. So if you time it just right, your arms and legs could add more force with every step, allowing you to run faster. When they removed the feeding tube from the mosquito, it was hollow and straight, but it was too fragile to use directly. So they coated it with resin to make it stronger and attached it to a needle tip. Then they built a 3D printer around it, and as ink flowed through the tube, it printed lines finer than a grain of sand, letting them build tiny structures most printers could never make, all thanks to a mosquito. The blade is wrapped tightly with fabric and soaked in fuel. Next, it's put into a metal sheath with a flint. And as the blade is drawn out, the flint is struck by hand, producing sparks that light the fuel instantly. Now, the fabric doesn't burn away, only the fuel does. So as the sword swings through the air, the fuel whips around with it, leaving streaks of flame behind. To put it out, the burning blade is slid back into the sheath, cutting off oxygen until the fire dies. His head would retract like a turtle, dodging the incoming punch. Now, for that to work, your neck would fold into a tight curve, using new joints that let your spine bend without breaking. At the same time, strong muscles would pull your skull straight down like cables, and your shoulders would shift forward, making space for your head to slide in. Now, your chest would have to somehow open up inside, so your skull has somewhere to go, at which point you could duck your head super fast and avoid getting hit. The car's body was cut in half, and two mini bikes were split down the middle. Their frames were welded inside the car, while their motors were reattached. When the halves were together, it looked like a normal car. But when they filmed the chase scene, a lever was pulled, which split the car into two separate vehicles. Each one had its own steering, allowing the drivers to dodge pedestrians and escape down an alley too big for the police car. As he swallowed the coffee berries, his stomach dissolved the soft fruit, while the hard bean stayed intact, and it was fermented by his stomach acid before he pooped it out. Then he collected the beans. After cleaning and roasting them, he posted them for sale on Craigslist, and they sold out quickly. The same method is used with civets to make the most expensive coffee in the world. So people were excited to drink poop coffee made by a human. And even though some didn't like the taste, he still had 40 people on his waiting list. Tiny lines are cut into the egg and filled with plaster before they're sanded smooth and painted so the cracks are invisible. The eggs are placed on a metal countertop, heated by propane burners with small air tubes hidden underneath the table. When filming starts, compressed air blasts up through the tubes, making the eggs shake and bounce. And as the pressure builds, the shells split along the hidden cuts, spilling the yolks. And since the counter is heated from below, the eggs start frying on camera, making it look like something invisible is attacking the kitchen. She reached into the toilet, thinking she could just pull the blockage out. But as her arm went deeper, her watch got caught on the narrow part of the pipe. It squeezed around her wrist, trapping her hand in place as she called for help. Responders had to unscrew the entire toilet from the floor. They carried it outside with her still attached. Then they smashed it with a sledgehammer, finally setting her free. If you slip a ring onto a chain and let it go, it will slide down and fall off. Instead, hold the chain between your thumb and forefinger, with the rest of your fingers curled into a fist, keeping the chain hanging. Then thread it through the ring turned sideways. When you drop it, pull your thumb away to give it a slight spin. As it falls, one edge hits the chain first. That point becomes a pivot, flipping the ring around the chain. The chain slips into a loop and tightens as the ring drops, snagging it mid-fall. And in real time, it looks like magic. Tell them to squeeze the egg as hard as they can. As they grip it, the pressure spreads evenly around the arch of the shell, instead of concentrating on one spot. So even as they squeeze harder, it won't break. Now, hand an egg to your friend who's wearing a ring. After watching the first person, they'll try squeezing even harder, but what they don't know is that their ring focuses all that pressure into one tiny point, meaning they'll get a handful of raw egg. Tape a paint roller along the leaf blower's nozzle, then slide a toilet paper roll onto the roller and position it so the loose end sits next to the airflow before turning it on. The fast air shoots forward, and the air pressure beside it drops, pulling the nearby air inward. This causes the paper to get sucked sideways into the stream, and once it touches the fast air, the drag pulls the sheet forward. The roll spins and unspools non-stop, giving you a toilet paper cannon. If you can stay in this room for an entire year, you would win $1 billion. But the room is padded, and it's almost completely silent. Now at first, this might seem peaceful, but then you would start hearing your own heartbeat. Soon, another strange sound starts creeping in. It's your eyes blinking. With nothing else to focus on, you could quickly lose track of time, making minutes feel like hours. Your brain could become so desperate for stimulation that you might see and hear things that aren't really there. Over time, your mind could start breaking down. So even if you won the $1 billion, you probably wouldn't be able to enjoy it, and you might just end up back in another padded cell. The killer approached and murdered her inside her apartment. Police came and investigated, but the case went cold. Now later, they discovered a second set of blood at the scene, so they knew someone else had been there. But at the time, they couldn't identify the person. So her husband made a decision. He wouldn't move the furniture. He wouldn't touch the layout. He would preserve the apartment as it was for the next 26 years. Then, decades later, forensic technology advanced, and the DNA was tested again. It matched someone the husband knew. It was a woman who had confessed her feelings to him in high school. He rejected her, and she later killed his wife, allegedly. They take old newspaper and coat it with glue before they're stacked on top of more newspapers. Then they're pressed together and rolled to form a thick log. Once it hardens, they slice through it with a saw, exposing layers that look like tree rings. Next, it's cut into thin sheets, polished like real wood, and used to make furniture. He watched the stranger type in his locker code, then opened it and stole his bank card before soaking his phone in water. Next, he went to an ATM and typed in the same code, which turned out to be correct. Now, the stranger couldn't receive alerts because his phone was damaged. This let him withdraw money with ease, and he did this over and over until he was caught. The needle is injected into your eye to numb it before a tiny cut would be made. Then the sides would be lifted up to create a small pocket, so a tiny charm could be slid inside. And when it healed, you would have a tiny heart sitting on your eye. But the pocket makes it easy for bacteria to get inside, which could cause serious damage. But even though it can make you blind, it's still perfectly legal in the Netherlands. He placed the shotgun inside the headboard and rested it on an internal shelf while the front panel kept it shut. Now, when the bad guys arrive, he just reaches up, presses the headboard in, and the gun drops down right into his hands. After it's used, he just puts it back in. The panel snaps shut like nothing ever happened. He folded the cardboard into a small box, then poked a hole through one side. The tiny hole funneled light rays into straight paths, creating an upside-down image inside the box. And a chemically treated glass plate caught that light, burning the image onto them, turning the cardboard into a camera. You see, he built it while trapped in a prison camp to show what was happening inside. And while others stood watch, he photographed starving prisoners. Then he wrapped the photos in a waterproof cloth and buried them until the war ended. They were released decades later, showing what really happened inside these camps. The entire ship slowly tilts upwards until most of it is pointing deep in the ocean. And they do this because waves mostly move just the top layer of water. So with most of the ship below the surface, the waves can't really push it around. Then compressed air pushes the water back out, and the rear floats back up to the surface. They painted his head with a special gel and covered bandages with plaster to lay on his face. Once it dried, they filled it with more plaster, making a cast of his head, which they scanned and combined with a digital picture for an exact replica of his face. Then they inserted a skull design inside and carved down his face to show the metal parts. By combining this with CGI, the Terminator's face could strip away throughout the film, revealing the robot underneath. When a lobster crawls inside a trap, it eats the bait first, before looking for a way out. But when it travels through a second opening, the walls get steeper and steeper, forcing them to move forwards until they reach the second part of the trap where there's no escape. Now, if the lobster is small enough, it can slip out of the tiny holes in the sides. And if the trap gets lost at sea while there's still lobsters inside, rings on the side panel will break down over time, letting them escape. He lights the torch, then runs the flames over the cactus, burning the sharp spines right off the pads. They do this during severe droughts, when the grass has dried up and there's almost nothing left for the cattle to eat. So the herd moves in and starts chewing the cactus. And because the thick green pads are full of water, it helps keep the cattle alive in the heat. But if the rancher can't burn the spines off fast enough, the desperate cattle will still eat the cactus anyway, which can shred their mouths. As you open the door, the light travels into your eye and sends a nerve signal that tells your pupils to shrink so less light enters your eyes. But inside your brain, there's other nerves nearby, including one connected to your nose and sinuses. And some scientists think that the signals can get crossed, so when bright light hits your eyes, your brain mistakes it for irritation in your nose, which causes it to trigger a sneeze. Hold the ribbon between your ring finger and middle finger while making the peace sign. Then lay it over your middle finger and under your pointer. Loop it around your pointer and under your middle finger, making a figure 8. And after doing the same thing once more, pull the tail between your fingers. Next, pull the tail up and turn your hand over before threading the ribbon under itself. And after pulling it tight and cutting the tails, you'll have the perfect butterfly bow. If you drop gum onto the carpet and try to pull it out while it's still warm, it'll only get twisted into the fibers. This makes it harder and harder to remove. Instead, smear a bag of ice cubes all over the top. The cold temperature hardens the rubber inside, which makes it less sticky. Then scrape it off with a spoon and clean the spot with detergent and water to make it look like the gum was never there. You're dropped into a forest at night, barely able to see, and somewhere out there are other people who might want to kill you. Now, your only goal is to survive as long as possible, but everyone else in this forest has the exact same goal. So, if you run into someone, it's not guaranteed that they'll kill you, but you have no way of knowing that. And if you wait to find out, it might not end well. Which means, in this forest, the safest move isn't trust. It isn't curiosity, it's being the first to strike right away. But what if the entire universe is the dark forest, and every civilization out there is just another person in the dark? If one finds another, they can't know its intentions, meaning the safest move is to either strike right away or stay quiet and hidden, which could be the reason we haven't found extraterrestrial life. You see, we assume we're alone in this universe, but maybe we're just the only ones not hiding. The cable was tied and she ran down the 70-foot pipe. And even though bombs were dropping all around, she made it out the other side. You see, a soldier had bought her during a poker game, and she joined him on Air Force missions. As they were building an airbase, they had to lay an underground cable, but digging up the ground would take 3 days and make them easy targets for the enemy. So the soldiers sent the Yorkie through the pipe, running the cable in minutes and saving hundreds of lives. They twisted the cloth and strengthened it with a wire. Then they attached the top to a motor line on the ceiling and stuck the bottom through a hidden slot on the floor, where a crew member could move the bottom in one direction while the top moved in another, creating a twisting effect. Next, they placed a miniature farm in front, and crew members blasted clouds of dust into the air. After filming the scene, they projected the footage behind the actor to create the illusion of a real tornado. They would sit in the window seat of every other row down the plane. Then the second group would come in to fill the rest. And instead of people standing behind each other as they put away their carry-ons, you would get to your seat quickly, keeping the aisles clearer than before. Next, they would repeat this process with the middle seats, and then the aisle seats, making the entire boarding time way faster. But it also means families would be split up, so airlines never used it, which is why boarding still takes so long today. He slid out the card from the dollar bill, and it pierced straight through the paper, even though the dollar was totally intact. And this works because the card was actually made from two identical cards, glued together at the top. The bottom half of one card was cut away, and when he wrapped the dollar around it, the flap hooked into the folded bill, looking like it was passing through the paper. He had just finished playing a superhero on screen and went to visit sick children at a hospital. When they gathered around him, he refused to leave until he had met everyone. And despite feeling weak himself, he celebrated a girl's birthday at her bedside, bringing her the courage she needed. But what no one knew is that this superhero was also dying. You see, he had been battling cancer for 4 years, but he kept it a secret. And when he died 2 years later, people realized he had been fighting the same illness as the children he was there to comfort. Blend up the cornflakes before scooping out a ball of ice cream and rolling it in the crumbs. Then wrap the ball tightly in plastic and put it in the freezer for an hour. Once it's rock hard, whisk some eggs until they're fully mixed and roll the ice cream in it. Then cover it with one more layer of cornflake crumbs before dipping it in boiling oil for a few seconds. The crumbs are fried almost instantly while insulating the ice cream inside. And when you pull it out and cut it open, you'll have a hot, crispy shell filled with frozen ice cream. When Batman defeats the Joker, he could just kill him and be done with it. But instead, he just locks him up again, where the Joker will inevitably escape and end up hurting more innocent people. You see, Batman doesn't want to become like the man who pulled the trigger on his parents. But by not killing, Batman lets the cycle continue and more people get hurt. The question is simple. If ending one life saves multiple lives, then mathematically, wouldn't that be worth it? The manhole cover started shaking, then suddenly it launched into the air. The blast knocked people off their feet, and houses quickly caught fire. You see, liquid gas had leaked out of a tank and into the sewers, and when a spark ignited it, a massive explosion ripped through the pipes. 20 minutes later, another tank exploded, and since gas had poured through the drains in people's homes, this ignited too, setting their houses on fire. In the end, the whole neighborhood was leveled, and around 130 people were killed, making it the biggest explosion in Ohio's history. If a 9-volt battery was pressed against a nose ring, with the ends connecting to make a loop, the electricity would travel up the metal and straight into the skin. Now, the inside of the nose is moist and salty, which conducts electricity really well. So instead of just breaking the connection, it would make a complete circuit, and the electricity would flow through again and again. At first, it would just feel like a strong zap, but after a few more seconds, blisters would start to form, and if it was left on for long enough, it could permanently damage the nose. His leg was amputated after he got cancer, but after discovering that there was barely any money for cancer research, he decided to raise funds himself. He scooped up a bottle of water from the Atlantic Ocean and started running, hoping he could eventually reach the Pacific Ocean to pour the seawater in. He ran a marathon every single day, collecting donations from people he passed by. He pushed through leg injuries and even a severe snowstorm, determined to finish his mission. But a few months later, the cancer spread to his lungs, and he passed away before reaching the end. His story inspired people to run in his honor, raising over $1 billion since then and saving many lives. They built up giant seawalls, hoping it would keep them safe from tsunamis. But the waves crashed right over them, destroying entire towns and killing thousands of people. So when they rebuilt the towns, they stretched out the walls hundreds of miles along the coastline. Some sections rose almost 50 feet tall, with foundations going over 80 feet into the ground. That way, even if a huge wave crashed onto them, it would give people enough time to escape to higher ground. He had to shave his entire body before stepping into a human-sized pod filled with thick, slimy liquid. Then he was attached to thick tubes and cables to make it look like the machine was feeding him. When the pod opened, valves inside released, letting the liquid rush out. And he shot down through a built-in chute into a water tank below before a mechanical claw pulled him out. The massive stone would be lifted, cut with diamond saws, and tossed into a tumbler the size of Mount Fuji until the surface was completely smooth. Then a giant handle would be attached with titanium screws to make a curling stone nearly 10 feet wide. It would be placed on top of a giant ice sheet in Antarctica and yanked forwards with 2 giant tow trucks as 30 players swept in front of it, letting the stone glide across the ice. But because the stone would weigh around 40,000 pounds, if any of the players slipped, it wouldn't end well.